So we are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. And it has to be judicious, because that's what we're all about. We want peace, liberty, and justice for the great people of Venezuela, and that includes many from Venezuela that are now living in the United States and want to go back to their country. It's their homeland.
Dipping out of it is President Trump's first live press conference after the capture of the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife. Some extraordinary comments being made by the president. I have to say he sounded exhausted, very hoarse, very sort of lacklustre energy, but is still talking. And the reason we've come out of it is because he's starting to talk quite locally about things in Louisiana and Los Angeles. But let me just up some for you, some of the comments he made. He said it was an extraordinary military operation, overwhelming military power, the most spectacular assault since World War II. He talked about bringing an outlaw dictator to justice, that it was a stunning and effective display of US military competence, the best in history. Is no surprise that he would say something like that. He went on to say that no nation could have achieved what the US has. He talked about it being done in the dead of night, that the lights of Caracas were switched off, that it was dark and deadly, and that Maduro and his wife have been indicted on charges of deadly narco terrorism. He talked about the speed, the power, the competence of the American military, the fact that the US is a respected country like never before. But I think one of the key phrases in there was this, that he said the US is going to run the country until we can find a safe and proper judicious transfer, that they can't take the risk that someone who doesn't have the best interests of the Venezuelan people taking control. He then went on to talk about how America would now fix the oil infrastructure in the country, and that America was actually ready, he says, the US military was ready to stage a second and larger attack on Venezuela if necessary. He went on to talk about a partnership with Venezuela and claimed that it would make now the people of Venezuela rich, independent and safe. I mean, so much to absorb there. Let's speak to former senior advisor at the US Department of State and the White House National Security under President Biden, Nega Anga. It is absolutely extraordinary to hear this press conference. What are you thinking at this moment about why this happened and what this means for President Trump's hold of power in the region?
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks for having me on. It's quite remarkable. Obviously, we haven't seen these sorts of actions really since, the optics really feel like the era of Saddam Hussein and Noriega. Even the images posted showing Maduro on USS Iwo Jima in his gray tracksuit and holding a water bottle really gave off some of those vibes, but also meant to signal total control of the situation. I think one of the most astonishing parts that I'm still absorbing myself is, the comment that the United States will run the country and what that actually means. I think we're going to have to continue hearing and unpacking it. So far, prior to the statement, I mean, reactions internationally have been, sharply split. You have Brazil, who's called the operation unacceptable, wants a UN discussion. Other regional governments are quietly welcoming Maduro's removal. Europe obviously is stressing international law concerns. Washington is pointing to the longstanding indictments, and that's what we've heard in President Trump's speech. I think we should expect a heavy UN Security Council session over the next 24 to 48 hours to help unpack what this means. I'm hoping that we'll get some clarification of what this interim sort of political lane means. What does this recognition and succession rules actually articulate, so that there's no vacuum? Hopefully there'll be a stabilization package with the neighbors to prevent any kind of reprisals and looting that we normally see, and protecting the critical infrastructure and corridors beyond the oil fields. And obviously some guardrails around the mission, some sort of, hopefully a short timeline, and consultations with other multilateral bodies like the OAS and other regional partners.
I just saw a very brief reaction before this press conference of Maria Corina Machado, who was the opposition candidate who was replaced, actually, and barred from running for office by Maduro. But she won the Nobel Peace Prize. From what I understand, her reaction has said that this is freedom hour for the Venezuelan people. But I wonder whether she is gulping herself at this press conference when she herself hears, and we don't know how much conversation Trump's administration had with the opposition there in Venezuela before this attack. Ian talked about a partnership with Venezuela. What does that mean? A partnership with who? If there's a vacuum of Venezuelan power, who is that partnership with? What are you hearing, if anything, at this stage about the reaction in Venezuela from those who themselves has opposed the president who is now indicted in America?
I think, as you rightly pointed out, there is an element of, the excitement and the freedom for Venezuela to have a new chapter. But I think, the part that's concerning is that the decapitation is always the easy part. And I'm putting that, obviously very lightly. It was an incredible operation by the U.S. government to achieve what they achieved. It was no small feat. But the hard part is the day after. It's, again, it's providing the credibility of whoever the next, even if it's an interim government, preventing chaos on the streets and in the institutions. And I think, I think that's what we're going to have to be concerned about. And that's what we're going to have to see over the next several days, of a credible transition of power. And what does that mean? What does that entail in Venezuela at this moment in time?
Yeah, and many people reacting to this have said, look, what signals does this give to President Putin, to President Xi of China and Taiwan and Ukraine? How can President Trump now call out them when he potentially has committed a similar flouting of international law and entered a sovereign country?
You're absolutely right. I think that is a concern that's been floating around, of the precedent-setting nature of what just occurred. And of course, we'll have to be able to go back to understanding the international law and the international law that is applied in this particular case. And whether or not that is sort of same kind of international law can be applied by, others, Putin or Xi or others. But for right now, the U.S. government is pointing to a series of international legal indictments that
Well, he called him the kingpin of drug trafficking. What that means for a fair trial, I don't know, when the president is already describing him as that. But of course, there's no secret about what he believes he is guilty of.